Covered in the last 3 episodes of Ready to Love, we have everyone meet the exes, we have the ladies meet the guys' best friends, and then we come to the first part of a 2-part episode dealing with them going to a getaway somewhere near the Everglades. So let's begin with meeting the exes. Now, as has been noted throughout a good part of the season, multiple women of this season have exes who are not only their ex, but also the father of their children. For the most part, we don't meet most of the fathers of the children outside of Cynthia's case. And when it comes to Cynthia's ex, who she's known for more than a decade and is probably one of her first loves, he's a piece of work. When he meets Andre, it's nothing but a contentious conversation. And when he meets Anthony, Anthony rides, or rather, rides the boat, rocks the boat. He's able to deal with all the caustic and all the kind of aggressiveness that Cynthia's ex gives him, and he's able to deal with it, manage it, and he seems prepared to, in the long term, eventually work to an understanding with the man so at least it could be copacetic. But when it comes to the other situations, one of the things that come up with Morgan's ex, for example, is that Morgan, when she was very mad at this ex, she used Nair to basically burn his hair off. Tony hears this and he's kind of like, okay, but at the same time, Tony's bald, so why would he care? But Lyndon, this becomes an issue for him, and it becomes an issue for his friend in the next episode when his friend hears about it. But we'll get to that in a second. I should note though, not everybody gets to meet an ex. Jeffrey, for example, her exes are the father of her children, and it seems in both cases the father abandoned her and the children, so there's no ex to meet. For Blue, who was still on the show at the time, this was a red flag to him because in his mind, this should be more details to this, but Mark Anthony's a bit more understanding. Now, as for everybody else who had their exes come on, honestly, it was kind of uneventful, at least uneventful of like 2 weeks removed from what happened, so there's not really much to say. But what can be said is that the bottom two, when it comes to this episode, was Blake and also Blue, and because Blake still has Advocate Sue, and Blue was kind of like there and non-controversial, but also not really like strongly attached to anybody, he gets eliminated. Moving on to the next episode with Meet the Friends. Again, it's not like anybody's friend is like how we saw last season when the friends got really combative and really got, to the point where they were pissing people off. Pretty much the way that it is, it seems for a lot of people who the friend thought would be a good match for one of the cast members and who the cast members were interested in didn't necessarily go in sync. Now, in some cases it did, like when it came to Anthony and Cynthia being a good match, or maybe Mark Anthony being good with Mercedes, but as for everybody else, it usually caused more issues than it caused solutions. Like in the case of Tony's friend met both Morgan and Marcia, and really, his friend was torn to the point where he was unhelpful. Another person who kind of made things more complicated or didn't help at all is Blake's friend, who comes on board, and with Blake's friend, she only meets Sue-Ann because Blake ain't got no other matches, and her issue is that Sue-Ann was divorced within the last 2 years. She has 2 girls which she has to bring into the relationship, which comes with Blake having 3 boys, and since Sue-Ann doesn't have experience with blended families and she is seen as recently divorced, now Blake is starting to question things even after all that Sue-Ann has advocated for and all that she's done. So that's kind of where we get the pattern of when it comes to meeting the exes and meeting the friends. It causes more questions and complications more than it causes people to really like nail down their choices. But as we get to the getaway, it becomes rather clear now that everybody's seeing who's matched with who you need to really focus on, and who is just an alternative in case that person decides to leave you in the dust. Case in point, when it comes to Andre and Cynthia, when Andre and Cynthia went through the whole meet the ex, meet the friends thing, it became clear to Andre that maybe him and Cynthia, though they were really strong early on, maybe when he took that COVID break, that pretty much put a stop to that, and now she's definitely somebody more so for Anthony. The same could potentially be said for Jeffrey in some ways, because Jeffrey and Andre are now sneaking away to kiss and, really getting close, while Mark Anthony is pretty much focused on Mercedes because while he does have some interest in Jeffrey, the problems are getting more and more about him having to face the facts that she is a mother of multiple kids and he has no experience with that. Never mind, he's trying to his best just focus on I'm dating her, and he's discounting the fact that dating her means coming with the kids. So that's going to be a major issue and potentially why he may end up with Mercedes. But so comes the issue at hand with Blue being gone. Marcia gets kicked to the curb, and that leads to the big to-do that we've been seeing getting hyped for most of the season, which is Lyndon versus Tony over Morgan's hand. Now, as we've said in previous recaps that were written and also in the video reviews, Morgan has been using Lyndon to a certain degree to, light a fire under Tony's ass. But now with Marcia gone, now that's kind of going to bite her in the ass because Tony is not only kind of like a pit bull alpha male type, but he's also competitive. So Lyndon being someone who he has to compete against, and he doesn't look at Lyndon as competition, yet somehow, some way, Morgan makes it seem like he is, it causes a bit of a conflict in his head. And with that, he comes to the point where now it's a head-to-head thing. It started off as something simple and competitive, like playing pool for who Morgan's going to sleep with that night. And when I say sleep with, I mean, well, when it comes to the game they were playing, it seemed like sleep with just meant like in the same bed. But, things happen during the getaway episodes. That aside, Lyndon lost that one. But even with that loss, because Morgan is still in Tony's mind entertaining Lyndon and he keeps popping up and she's not pushing him off or trying to shut him down, this increasingly gets him agitated to the point where he decides to, when Lyndon starts asking him questions and, getting a little bit too familiar, he decides to, maybe it's time to push back and go off a little bit. This leads to Lyndon revealing that when Morgan and Tony were having issues, he was talking about if, hey, Marcia sticks around, you could have Morgan, and Lyndon decides to bring this out in order to get some kind of comeback after, Tony kind of sunned him a little bit. This causes major issues for Morgan because, throughout this whole season, she wasn't really sure about Tony. I mean, Tony was her top. Tony was her favorite. But at the same time, with her relationship history, as much as she wanted Tony, she also needed to be careful because she knows that anything could happen in the process like this. So with Lyndon saying what he said, combined with her insecurities and issues from before this episode, now those two are in a rocky place, especially since, as we've seen with Morgan dealing with Blake and how she decided to put nail in her ex's head, she not only has a sharp tongue, but she can perform certain actions which can easily get under people's skin without her fully realizing the effect of what she says or does. Sometimes. Not all the time. But in the case of Tony, she definitely says the wrong things to him in terms of common sense and his anger and how she doesn't like certain things about him that makes him maybe have some type of, for lack of a better way of putting it, buyer's remorse in terms of him allowing Marcia to be eliminated rather than trying to push for Sue-Ann or somebody else over the past 2 or 3 episodes. But even with all those problems with Morgan and everything, for some reason, the men got to eliminate 2 times in a row. It was Marcia in one episode, and now it's going to be either Sue-Ann or else Mercedes in this one. Now, as for who's more likely to get eliminated, it's hard to say. Sue-Ann and Blake have been basically a potential endgame couple for quite some time now. And when it comes to Sue-Ann and Anthony, that's dead, so she doesn't really have any options. It's pretty much Blake only has her and she only has Blake. Mercedes, on the other hand, she is Mark Anthony's top. She's sort of an option for Anthony, But at the same time, she's also on Andre's shit list from not checking on him when he had COVID. So it's hard to say whether or not she may survive this elimination, especially since the whole homie vibe thing has been said. And when any woman on this show gets that homie vibe thing, usually that's kind of a death knell. So, in terms of highlights for these 3 episodes, first and foremost, I think one of the major highlights has to be that Anthony made a major comeback. And I say that because for most of the season, Anthony was kind of like Blue and a few others where it's like, yes, he's there, but he's mostly there because he's not offensive. But at the same time, he's only doing just enough to maybe stay on a lady's radar, but not enough to make them feel like you are my top connection. But now with Cynthia, he's really showing proof. And in some ways, he tried with Sue-Ann, but I think with Sue-Ann, he was going through the motions, maybe to kind of protect himself in the voting situation more than he was seriously interested in her. At least if you go by the whole lack of communication thing that keeps being brought up when it comes to their situationship or relationship, that was a consistent issue. But that aside, he's really pushed himself to be one of the most top contenders for being in the final 3 couples with Cynthia, who of course, we love and adore because Cynthia still is probably one of the best cast members they have ever put onto the show. To me, Cynthia represents the type of person that they are often talking about this show getting. Someone who's a woman or a person of a certain age who, yes, may have a history, some baggage or whatever, but they've processed it to the point where they truly are ready to love and not just find a love for now, like in terms of just some fun, sex, whatever, but perhaps somebody who they can find as a life partner, get married, and maybe either have additional kids, raise the kids that they have together, or just enjoy each other's company. In terms of other highlights, I definitely want to give Sue-Ann and Blake a noted highlight just because I feel like they're one of those couples like Cornelius and Camille from past seasons where you don't fully get it, yet at the same time it works well for them. Like, Blake is the type who, he's not for everybody. And I think with Sue-Ann, be it because she was divorced for 2 years and hasn't had a serious relationship since then, or maybe something else, there's definitely something about her which maybe makes her a little bit more hesitant with the other men. And because of that, she can come off maybe standoffish, or that she grabs so quickly onto Blake because he was in need of her rather than in the case of having to want her and maybe make her work a bit more. I don't know. Either way, those two definitely are a highlight to me. And I have to admit, the whole Morgan, Lyndon, and Tony thing is also a highlight. Now, it's not necessarily a highlight in terms of what this show is trying to produce in terms of relationships, but if you want to talk about entertainment and drama, it is certainly a highlight. Morgan, for most of this season, at least the latter half anyway, has shown herself to be someone a bit manipulative, and I would even say she perhaps met her match with Tony. And then you have Lyndon in the middle, who you want to have get out of this situation, yet he seems to be very much in like or in love with Morgan, so it's kind of like maybe it's this whole situation that's bringing the worst out of Morgan, and maybe it's not who she is for real. But then that whole Nair situation gets brought up, so while I don't see any combination of Morgan and Tony or Morgan and Lyndon being part of the final 3, I will say the drama and entertainment definitely gives Ready to Love something, as a lot of the other couples seem to be unsure of what they want, what they need, and whether or not they're just handling this all by process of elimination. And that's probably the last highlight, though. It might actually be on the fence topic, and that's just, in many ways, I feel like I'm ready for this to wrap up because I don't know whether or not these couples really want each other anymore. Like, as we just said, it's starting to increasingly feel like it's a process of elimination type of thing, more than these people really like or love each other. Or in the case of maybe Blake and a few others, a case where they even had options in the first place, so now it's like it's either this person or I'm just leaving on my own with nothing to show for this whole experience. And honestly, it just makes me feel more and more, and I know this has been said many times before. I think we even made a video about what needs to be improved when it comes to Ready to Love, but I do honestly feel that what this show needs less of is this charismatic host. It needs more so some type of relationship expert who has done studies, has an education, whether it's a master's or a full-on PhD about relationships. And hell, if they are somebody who had a focus in black people relationships, even better. Because there's so much here that makes me feel like when it comes to all this indecision, it's less about how many options these people have and more about they have this unprocessed trauma that they're so afraid of getting into again, that's causing the conflict and that's making these obstacles. But I could be off. I took 1-2 psychology classes in college, so it could be much more than that. It could be far simpler than that. I'm not sure. Which leads to the final part, which is just what we expect to happen. In terms of who could be eliminated next for the men, Blake is forever going to be part of the bottom two when it comes to our opinion. But the question is, who will join him? And that's when things get complicated, mainly since I can fully imagine if Blake doesn't end up in the bottom two, it could easily become either Tony and Lyndon in the bottom two. Mainly since Lyndon doesn't have any other options, Tony doesn't have any options, and I'm sure when the ladies get together and they start hearing about what's happening with Tony and what's happening with Lyndon, Tony, as much as that whole alpha male thing might be attractive to some, as they start seeing the other side of it, that may make him less attractive and make it so that he might get eliminated, just because as much as that old school man's man thing might be interesting, the old school, which comes with a lot of aggression and toxic masculinity too, that may not really cut it for these ladies. Now, as for who could get eliminated next with the ladies, I'm going to assume Sue-Ann's going to get cut when it comes to episode 11 of this season. So when it comes to who of the ladies may get cut the next time, assuming we're not about to do the final 3 decisions, it's going to be between Mercedes, because that homie vibe is a curse. And I think, I want to say Cynthia could probably join her at the bottom. And that's just because Cynthia is losing the interest of Andre, and while she is Anthony's top pick, at the same time, I don't know how much collateral, or rather influence, Anthony has in order to protect his person. Since sometimes I think what we don't really get to see is the wheeling and dealing about who gets eliminated and who doesn't. We just hear Nephew Tommy get a short summary of who's in your top, who's your not, and a short reason why. And as for the actual who gets eliminated thing, that's probably a much deeper conversation than we know. With that said, I think when it comes to the final couples, we're at a point where it's definitely going to be Blake and Sue-Ann. I feel like it could be Anthony and Cynthia. Mark Anthony and Mercedes are a possibility, as well as Andre and Jeffrey. And part of me wants to say Morgan may end up with somebody, but I don't see them lasting past the reunion episode. And when it comes to the people who we just mentioned, the final couples, I do think when it comes to Mark Anthony, Mercedes, or maybe Andre and Jeffrey, either one of them or both of them could definitely be the type where once the show is over and they're not kind of pushed to interact and be together, there is a chance that the relationship may fall off. But I'm not 100% sure.